This story takes place back in 2006 when I was still an undergrad in college. I worked at a dorm hall cafeteria back then and had just finished a grueling shift of heavy lifting and disgusting cleaning. After work, I headed to the library before walking to my apartment to log onto the internet, check my email, and do general internet things. As I was about to enter the library, a very strange-looking guy, about 5.5 feet tall, approached me. He was black, with a lighter skin tone, and had a kind of big forehead and buggy eyes. To paint this story, I am a white male, and at this point, I was 19, overweight, with long curly hair and a beard. This odd-looking guy walks up to me outside the library and asks if I have the time. I found this question strange since, at my university, the library is next to a giant clock tower. Also, this guy was wearing a watch. However, I told him the time and kept along my way. I headed into the elevator in the library. The computers were on the 3rd floor, and I noticed this guy got on the elevator with me. I figured it might have been a coincidence, so I shrugged it off. But when I got off on my floor, he stops me again. And he proceeds to make one of the strangest requests I've ever heard. He tells me that he is part of a program that sends high school students to our university to take college courses. He said that he was part of a science class and was asked to approach a stranger and see if the length of his foot was equivalent to the length of his forearm. This guy already gives me the creeps, so I ask him, "What course exactly is asking you to do this?" And he replies with, "Science class." I tell him that this is college, and there is no such thing as science class, and I proceed to walk away. He follows me and bothers me once more. He says, "Look, can you please help me out? You don't even need to take your shoes off. Just sit down and let me look at your foot and forearm and see if the length is the same." Now, I have a feeling I am going to get some major hate for this, but let me defend myself before I tell the rest of the story. I am absolutely exhausted at this point in the day. I have been lifting heavy stuff for about 5 hours, and I just want to check my email in peace. Further, I have not made the oh-so-important connection that this guy is a foot fetishist at this point. So finally, to shut the little bastard up, I tell him, "Fine." So we go to a corner in the library, and we sit with him across from me. At this point, he asks me to take off my shoe. At first, I'm about to protest that he just said I could leave my shoes on, but at this point, I just want him to go away. So I do so. He proceeds to stare at my foot and begins breathing really heavy and starts lightly grunting. This is the point where I realize that this guy is getting off sexually looking at my foot. So at this point, I just grab my shoes and run barefoot out of the cafeteria. I actually run up to the 5th floor in case he tries to follow me. I went the rest of the day and didn't encounter him again. I could end the story at this point, but I was actually fairly pissed off about this whole situation. I was pissed at myself for giving in to his stupid ploy, and pissed at some creep for tricking me into giving him some fat material. And as luck would have it, I was given an opportunity to seek revenge on this creep. Sometime later, maybe a few months, I saw this guy's picture appear as a friend of one of my acquaintances on Facebook. Out of curiosity, I looked at his profile, and most importantly, saw his AOL Instant Messenger screen name. So I created a fake screen name, pretending to be a girl, and proceeded to have a conversation with him. I told him I was a sorority girl and that I got his screen name from a friend. I don't remember the specifics, but I just remember talking very flirtatiously with him. He proceeded to flirt back, and I spent a few conversations just building a rapport with him. Finally, I wanted to mess with this guy a little, so at one point we start talking about what things people are into sexually. I remember telling him that some people are into the weirdest things, and proceeded to give a very long list of fetishes. I stuck the word feet in the middle of this list of maybe 10 things, and he isolated my one example of feet. He replies with, "Feet? Gross. How can someone be into something that's so stinky? That's nasty." I took satisfaction in this and ended the conversation without any other interesting comments. In our next conversation, I went for my final gambit. I told him that I was at a party, and a guy at the party said he had heard of my online friend that I was telling everyone about. This guy at the party said my online friend was a freak who used to harass people and look at their feet on campus. The creep at this point responded with the most bizarre response ever. He said something along the lines of, "What? I only did that once, and it was for a psychology class. It was with some hairy Mexican guy, and his feet were so nasty, I didn't even want him to take his socks off." I think at that point I got my revenge and embarrassed this guy. I never logged onto that screen name again. Eventually, the creep started becoming a regular at the cafeteria where I worked. but we never made eye contact. I don't know if he ate there by coincidence or if he really had a fascination with me, but we never had any contact again. Currently, I'm a 22-year-old female living in a city, but I grew up in a small town on the west coast of Newfoundland, Canada. It was a small, relatively safe town. Not a whole lot ever really happened there, some drug busts and a couple of suicides several years ago. Anyway, between the ages of 16 and 19, I volunteered and then worked at my town's public library. My coworkers were all wonderful, and the patrons generally liked me as I was always very polite and cheerful. But there was one guy. I remember seeing this guy around town from the time I was really young, and we always called him the turtle guy because he had this sort of pigeon-like walk, sauntering around and bobbing his head a lot. Seemed harmless at first, but still a little off. We had a CAP intern working with us for a while at the library. She would teach computer classes to some of the patrons on occasion. She was petite and quite pretty. Turtle guy, as we'll call him, would get classes with her every chance he got. I worked almost every day, and he was at the library every day. He would bring her candy bars sometimes and always asked way too personal questions. After a while, the girl's internship ended, and she stopped giving computer classes. This is when Turtle Guy seemed to turn his attention to me. I'm short for my age, always have been. I stand at about 5 feet in sneakers. I'm also petite, and I've always looked young. At 19, people would mistake me for 14, no joke. Anyway, so I'd be tidying the shelves some days, and this guy would just come up to me and start chatting with me. Harmless, really, asking my first and last name, although I never told him my last name, but he knew my first as I worked there. He'd also ask things like if I was in school. I was in college at the time, so I truthfully said yes. He'd ask what I was studying, how old I was. Thankfully, he never asked where I lived. I always walked around town on my days off when I was bored, and I remember one day he mentioned to me that I always looked kind of sad when I walked places and that I didn't look confident in myself. That kind of creeped me out a bit. The worst, I think, though, was when I volunteered to paint little pictures and sayings on the walls in the kids section of the library, and also a welcome sign banner thing over the front door in the porch. While I was painting in the kids section, I'd listen to my iPod and really get in the zone while working. Turtle Guy would almost every day come up behind me and watch me paint. One day I could hear him breathing heavily over the sound of my music. Very creepy and kind of disturbing. He would talk to me on occasion while I was painting in that part of the library, but mostly just watch me as I would ignore him. I always felt him there, watching. The worst was when I was painting the banner that had the wooden letters for the welcome sign that would be glued to the wall in the porch. I had to block the main doors and people would have to go through the side door to get into the library itself. I would be standing on a ladder painting away as people would come and go. I, of course, was always listening to music. Turtle Guy would, as per usual, stop and watch me paint for a while before entering and leaving the library. One day, according to one of my co-workers, Jay, Turtle Guy decided to almost try something. While I was standing on the ladder and Jay was watching Turtle Guy watch me, the guy decided to raise his hand up towards me as if he were going to grab my rear end. I had no clue as to what was going on because I was concentrating on the task at hand with music playing. But Jay told me that afterward, and it freaked me out. I now hate having people behind me at any time. Not really creepy, but also related. Whenever my then boyfriend would come to pick me up from work, if Turtle Guy was there, he'd give him a really hate-filled look. I never noticed this, but my boyfriend told me about it a few times. Also related, this guy used to be attached to another librarian. She'd read to him, but when she stopped, he got aggressive and even slapped her at the library. He was banned but was allowed back in as long as he took his meds. Yes, he was on medication from what I was told. Not sure for what, though. I am an 18-year-old female college student, very petite, and some say I don't look my age. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this story. I just thought I would give a little information about myself to preface. Anyways, on to the story. This happened about 2 months ago. I was honestly getting really irritated being on my college campus, and I just wanted to go somewhere else for some peace and quiet. So naturally, I ventured to the public library up the street. After walking in the heat and sweating like a pig, I finally arrived and looked for a place to sit and just watch YouTube since, Quite frankly, I couldn't be bothered to do anything else. I found an open area with several couches and chairs and no one in sight. To paint a picture of where I was sitting, there's a large window with chairs on either side facing each other, and I sat in one of them. So I take my seat and put in my headphones to block out the world. I had been there for about 20 minutes when an old man, I would say in his 70s, ventures in with a book, seemingly looking for somewhere to sit. He chooses one of the couches to the left of me, and I think nothing of it. Another man takes one of the chairs across from me, and he seemed to be of some religion, as he was doing some sort of practice. Out of nowhere, I kid you not, this old man gets up and sits directly across from me and right next to this other man, even though there were plenty of other places to sit. I thought it was a bit odd, but I just shrugged it off and kept on watching YouTube. At some point I looked up, and he was staring me straight in the eyes, and it kinda caught me off guard. But again, I didn't really think too much into it. That is until I noticed him staring at me every single time I looked up, which was at least 20 times over a 10-minute period. He just would not stop looking. Even the random guy next to him seemed to notice his odd behavior because, well, he wasn't even reading the damn book. He was using it to try and cover up the fact that he had been staring at me for the past 10 minutes. The scariest part is the way his face looked, and while I'm typing this, I can remember it almost exactly. He had the straightest, most blank stare I've ever seen, and it was very unnerving to say the least. At this point, I wasn't really sure what to do because I didn't want to make it too obvious that I had noticed. Finally, he ended up getting up and leaving, and I felt so relieved. I finally decided to pack up my things and hightail out of there before he came back. Before I left, though, I went over by the water fountains and the bathrooms and called my dad and explained the situation. He didn't seem too worried, but he told me to keep a lookout and be careful. Right after I ended the phone call, the man came around the corner and said with a wide grin, "Excuse me," and walked past me. Now, you might not think this is odd, but I was standing in an area that most people don't just shortcut through because it's where the bathrooms are, and there's a wall separating them from the rest of the area. The man could have easily just walked around that wall, as most people would. It just seemed as if he had been listening in on my conversation and made an excuse to walk by me. Needless to say, I left right after and was paranoid that he might follow me, but thankfully he didn't, and I haven't seen him since at that library.